So you're getting ready for that big iOS developer interview. You've probably been grinding away at coding challenges, right? But what about the stuff that shows you can think about the bigger picture? Well, today, we're going to dive deep into one of those key concepts, storyboard segues. We'll break down exactly what they are, how they work, and the one crucial insight that's going to make you stand out.
So what is the secret to really nailing that question about segues? Here's a hint. It's not just about spitting out a definition you memorized. It's about showing you understand the context, knowing not just what they are, but why you'd use them, and maybe more importantly, when you wouldn't. By the time we're done here, you're going to have that context down cold.
Okay, first things first. Before we can get to the pro-level tips, we have to make sure we're all on the same page with the fundamentals. So let's start at the beginning. What exactly is a storyboard segue?
At its heart, a segue is basically a bridge. It's a visual connection you draw right inside your storyboard that links one screen, a UI view controller, to another. It's like the literal blueprint for how a user is going to move through your app. But here's the deal. A segue isn't just a simple line on a storyboard. It's actually a bit of a workhorse with three main jobs. First, it handles navigation from point A to point B. Second, it defines the style of that transition. Does the new screen slide in? Does it pop up from the bottom? And third, and this is super important, it acts as a pipeline, letting you send data from that first screen over to the second one.
So how do you actually kick one of these off? Well, you've got two main ways to do it. You can do it visually, which is the super quick way, where you just connect it to something like a button. Or when you need a bit more control over the situation, you can trigger it programmatically, right from your Swift code. We'll get into how that works in just a sec.
Okay, so we've got the basic definition down. Now, let's get into the specifics, the kind of vocabulary that interviewers are really listening for. See, it's not enough to just say, I know what a segue is. You need to know the different flavors they come in. There are 6 main types, and knowing the difference is key.
Let's run through them real quick. First up, you've got show, or push. This is your go-to for standard navigation, like tapping an item in a list to see its details. Then there's show detail, which is mainly for iPad apps that have that split-screen master detail look. Present modally is what you use when you need to grab the user's full attention, like for a login screen or a pop-up form. Popover is another one you see a lot on iPad, great for showing extra info without taking over the whole screen. Custom, well, it's just what it sounds like. It lets you get creative and build your own cool transition animations. And finally, there's unwind. This one's your escape hatch for going backwards through your app's flow.
Okay, enough theory. Let's shift gears and see how this all plays out in the real world. How do you actually put these things to work in a project?
Creating a segue visually is honestly ridiculously fast. You literally just hold down the control key, click on a button, and drag a line over to the screen you want to go to. A little menu pops up, you pick the kind of transition you want, and boom, that's it. You've just wired up navigation in like 5 seconds.
But what if you only want to navigate if, say, the user is logged in? That's where you do it programmatically. First, you give your segue a unique name in the storyboard, kind of like a nickname. Then, back in your code, whenever you're ready, you just call this one line. performSegue with that identifier. This gives you total control over when the navigation actually happens.
All right, let's talk about what is, for my money, the most powerful part of a segue: passing data. I mean, it's pretty rare that a new screen doesn't need some kind of information from the screen that came before it. So how do we get that data from point A to point B?
The magic all happens in this one method: prepare for sender. Think of it as an interception point. Just before the segue actually happens, iOS calls this method and gives you a chance to step in. Inside here, you can check which segue is about to happen by looking at its identifier, grab a reference to the destination screen, and then just set whatever properties you need to. It's the perfect spot to pass along a user ID, a selected item, pretty much anything.
Okay, so you've nailed the basics. You know what segues are, you know the different types, and you know how to pass data. But here's the thing that's going to separate you from the pack. This is the insight that shows you're not just a coder, you're thinking like an architect.
And here is the golden nugget of information. You need to talk about the limitations. You explain that, segues are amazing for getting simple apps and prototypes up and running fast. But you also understand that in really big, complex apps, they can start to get a little messy and hard to manage. And that's why a lot of senior teams will opt for a fully programmatic navigation approach, because it gives them way more control and it's easier to scale in the long run.
It really all boils down to this trade-off right here. On one hand, segues are awesome for getting things done quickly. They're visual, they're easy for anyone on the team to understand just by looking at the storyboard. But the downside is less control, and in a massive app, they can turn into a real plate of spaghetti.
On the other hand, doing it all in code takes more typing up front, but you get total control and an architecture that can grow without getting tangled. A great developer knows which tool to pick for the job.
So, to wrap it all up, the next time somebody asks you about segues in an interview, don't just give them the textbook definition. Talk about the strategy. Talk about the trade-offs. Because the real question isn't just if you know how to use a segue. It's whether you have the wisdom to know when to use it and when not to. Now, that is the kind of answer that gets you the job.